Hello.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Hello. Today is Tuesday, January 22nd, 2019. This is the standard SIG cluster lifecycle meeting. Robbie, you want to go through the agenda?
Sure. So first on the agenda, I put something on here. Paris sent out an email just sort of reminding everybody on behalf of SIG ContribX that if you have not already, please join the Kubernetes dev mailing list. A lot of important announcements get sent there, and if you're not on that list, you're probably missing announcements. It's also for folks that are creating Google Docs and sharing them. A lot of organizations will prevent you from sharing docs publicly. So what people tend to do to work around that, to share docs with the community, is they will share with the SIG cluster lifecycle mailing list or with the Google, the Kubernetes dev, like Google Groups mailing list. And so a lot of times if you can't get access to a doc, if you join one or both of those mailing lists, that will fix the problem for you. So there's lots of great reasons to join the mailing list. Please do so. Hopefully everybody here is aware, is already on the list. But if you're not, a friendly reminder to do so. Next, Justin sent out a pull request, I think yesterday. We talked last time about sort of moving forward with our plan for add-ons for the year. So we finally actually, I think, maybe have the beginning of a plan as a SIG. Justin, you want to talk about your pull request? I know that there have been some people that have looked at it, but it just went out yesterday, so some people probably haven't also.
Yeah, thank you to everyone that did. The link is in the agenda, but it is an enhancement 746. It basically describes a broad plan to investigate managing add-ons using operators. Though we have code that Jeff Johnson and I have worked on for the GKA on-prem effort, we don't imagine that we can just like code dump that into OSS. And so we are proposing basically, examining it or going from first principles type thing. This is a KEP to sort of act as the umbrella for that work. And hopefully, discusses sort of the broad ideas that we have. And hopefully if anyone has any feedback, that'd be very welcome. There are some very open issues about how we structure the project, but I think before we even get to that, like what are we building type thing is sort of the first more important thing. Because if we can't, yeah.
So a quick question about like administrivia. Like there's a hard stop for 114 timeframe to get KEPs in place. Are you trying to meet that hard stop, or are you trying to like wait or span?
The hard stop, as I understand it, is for things that are going to be in the release, and this is unlikely to be in the 114 release, as far as I know. The deadline that I was trying to reach was this meeting, not which coincided with the KEP deadline, but that is a coincidence.
All right. Is there like again with administrivia, did you want to have like the typical pattern that we did with the other KEP, is like give it a couple of weeks, sort of time out for feedback, and then one more time during the SIG meeting to try and see if we can settle on any ambiguities or questions?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I would like to get the work going, but we are also working on that in other places as well. Like one of the things that we've identified is supporting KubeBuilder and the underlying libraries for sort of a declarative workflow, which is a good thing to add to KubeBuilder regardless of what we do. So that's sort of going in progress, and that's also poked up some issues about like their own repo guidelines, their own administrivia. But yes, I like the idea of like setting a relaxed timeline and encouraging people to put their feedback on there. We're trying not to put too much that is like we are going to do exactly X, Y, and Z. But yes, anyone that has the big picture feedback that would be great. I also saw like there was some great feedback already about identifying from Lubomir about like identifying the use of patches does make updating the underlying manifest harder, which is I think a good feedback to a good observation, and something we should call attention to as I would still like to proceed as a trade-off, but something we should definitely call attention to. And so that sort of feedback is super helpful. I see Lucas, there we are.
Yeah. I haven't been able to look at it quite yet, but is this envisioning using an operator that will ship, or is it not?
It is punted on that question. I don't think, one of the things the KEP does call out explicitly is that no, we're not going to require tooling to adopt this, right? If you don't want to adopt these operators, you don't have to.
Right.
I think the operator will be something that is even more dependent. Like I do hope that everyone will adopt operators for like the core components. I think the operator is one that if we build would be very much very optional, and like some people will use it, some people won't. There will be different operators for different operators for different scenarios. Like if you're doing cluster API, it might be that the thing which is building your cluster is a natural operator.
Right.
So that one is, there will have to be something that applies the bottom turtle, but it's not clear that is necessarily an operator in the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What the other thing we also discussed at KubeCon, which is interesting, I guess, is do we go with one like add-on kind and extensibility in what it can contain, or do we go with different API groups and kinds? What is our recommendation?
The KEP as outlined describes the idea of that each add-on would have its own kind. The two reasons for that, as I see them, are we want operators to be built by the component teams. So like the kubedns team should build their own operator, or the core DNS team should build their own operator, ideally in our end state, because they best know how to manage it. And so from that point of view, it would be a little weird to, well, I don't know. It seems to fit that better. The other one of which is my feeling with cluster API is that the extension block is sort of awkward. I don't know how other people feel about that, and that it might be easier to use duck typing. Sorry, it might be easier to use duck typing for common fields rather than a common fields with a wrapper. But I feel like this is something we can investigate. In our prototypes, we did different kinds. It does mean you end up with a plethora of kinds. It's, yeah. If people have views, I'm happy to hear them.
Well, we can probably go towards please review the KEP in detail and add comments, and maybe we can have a further poignant discussion once folks have gone through the KEP in detail.
I mean, Tim, we don't have a lot on the agenda today. I'd be curious for people that have sort of built their own add-on manager systems, if they're here, to maybe give like a brief overview of what their requirements might be, and then we can also point them if they kept to review those, but not necessarily talking about how you solve your problems, but like what the problems were that you found, right? Like I think Minikube may have different set of requirements than GKE, than COPS, than something else, right?
I mean, I can certainly speak to like, there were a lot of problems in the bash add-on manager, which I think everyone wants to avoid. And COPS is one tries to avoid them, but makes some other trade-offs. Most notably is the one that it's very hard to change one of the built-in add-ons in any form, and that when you do change it, it gets reverted like a minute later or 5 minutes later, which is sort of a pretty obnoxious behavior. I just think of the am I still there? I lost my screen.
You're still there, but you chopped out there for a second.
Okay, I don't know what happened, but I like to think of the YouTube video where like you open the box and the hand comes out of the box and closes itself, right? It's sort of that sort of obnoxious behavior. So we have to figure out whether we want to protect those resources or whether we want to just reconcile them much faster. We can do either. We haven't actually implemented either one of them yet. Yeah, that's the big one for me.
I think I saw Ben mention something. I see Thomas unmuted. So why don't we do Thomas first and then Ben?
Sure. So at least for Minikube, I'm not well versed in the add-on system yet, but it seems pretty basic. It's just a couple of YAML files that get reconciled and bundled into the binary. Unfortunately, that's kind of the painful part that we have is we basically support like an open marketplace where anyone can add their, submit their add-ons. And we have some growing pains in that area. Like how do you vet if an add-on is actually properly working, and how do you actually like get the tickets to the person who's maintaining it? We would really love to move to a model where every add-on ends up with its own like Git repository, and people open bugs on that specific Git repository, and it's updated separately from the Minikube releases. So that's decoupling that would be really nice for us. But
I think also decoupling for the air gap scenario too would be nice, especially as the add-ons grow. Because one of the common problems and the things that we solved in kubeadm was that to get a user story that wasn't terrible for how to manage their container lifecycle for the air gapped environment. Right. And we do the exact same thing. We just apply this blob of YAML, but that's not tenable across all these different providers.
Yep.
Yeah, we're in pretty much the same boat, and air gapping is important to because anywhere we're using the internet is somewhere we can flake in CI. And users have just recently started requesting add-ons, and I think we're trending towards the same direction of we don't really want to be shipping them ourselves, but having a good way to manage that. That is something that can be added on itself would be really useful.
Yeah, so I think air gapping is going to be a strong hard requirement.
Yeah, there is a potential solution. I don't want to like fixate on the solution, but the Josh Hoke's cluster bundle work, which is open sourced, potentially provides a solution there, in that it is a specification that can live like on an HTTPS endpoint somewhere, so you can pull it, or because those objects are also API type CRDs, they could be put into the cluster by bottom turtle, and then then you're then air gapped at that point.
Yeah, what becomes a little bit thorny too, because we're kind of treading into Pandora's box, but I guess we got time. Might as well dip the toe in to the tornado and see what happens. We're entering add-ons when doing with some of this stuff, because kubeadm explicitly punted this stuff to say like, here's the images in the YAML and you can go apply it. But whenever we get to the application space, then we're starting to tread into that sort of meta templating problem that exists in Helm. And if you have an operator, you instantly sort of subsume that state space of problems. So I don't know. I dip my toe in it.
I very much want to close that Pandora's box. Anything to do with application management is very much out of scope of this work. Even if users choose to use it for it, we are not going to target that with the use case. I do think that some of the templating issues do arise, and for example, users often want to change the resources allocated to an add-on, right? We might have other solutions for that, like autoscaler type things, but we don't want to get into the world where we have to map every single field, in my opinion. And that's where patches, like kubectl apply or like customize, so like kubectl patch or like customize could come in. That's where Libmir pointed out correctly that there is if the underlying structure changes significantly, your patch will no longer apply, and that's I think the trade-off. If you're not going to map it, you can't. Yeah, you risk breaking the underlying structure, and then breaking patches.
I think everyone else, is there anyone else that want to talk about this topic? Did you get out of this what you were looking for, Robert?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that multiple people talk about air gap scenarios is really important and a big takeaway for us, because I know it's mentioned in Justin's KEP, but I think it's something that maybe we should highlight a little bit more and make sure that we sort of really are addressing that as a core use case. That's kind of what I was going for, is like, are there important things that we really need to talk about in the KEP to make sure we're actually going to get the broad adoption that Justin's targeting? Like, if you look at the goals, we want tools to want to adopt this, and if we don't actually meet the requirements, it's not going to happen, right? So understanding the requirements ahead of time is really important.
Also, I'd like to point out discoverability. That's that's primarily why I asked about the add-on CRD versus many. Like, what is the difference? Like that is what I'm trying to, and I'm not saying we should discuss it here, but like think about is what is the difference between an arbitrary like arbitrary operator for my application that uses its own CRD, and what is the add-on thing that actually is like, well, it's required for my cluster and hence I run it. But what is the other difference? Is there any other difference from, like, say, a thing that installs a CSI thing to my cluster to make all my storage devices work, or a TD operator which just is backed for my web service or whatever, like for my applications? They both use operators, they both use the same CRDs, they have different API groups, but one is required for the cluster to function and one is not. But they still have no visible difference, right? So what is how can I know that this is actually an add-on that is managed as part of the cluster? Because that is one of the key things we want to scope it as. Like, this is why is this an add-on? Well, it's an add-on because if I don't upgrade it when I upgrade my cluster, I'm going to be in trouble.
Yeah, I think that last part is the most important bit, and Justin touched on it in the KEP, which is we want to limit the use of this for add-ons specifically, and add-ons are defined as things that are tied to the lifecycle of the cluster itself. Whereas generally applications their lifecycle is independent of the lifecycle of the cluster, whereas add-ons, like you said, need to be upgraded sort of with the cluster, right, at the same time. And I think given that definition, we can very drastically limit the scope of things that we target for add-ons, where something like Helm or an application manager has, very broad applicability. Even if we use some of the same techniques, we can say we don't have to support a whole bunch of these use cases because we have a very targeted set of things. One thing we did with the shell script kube add-on manager is we applied sort of consistent labels to everything that it was managing. And so I think part of the proposal is to apply some consistent labels or annotations to things so that we can tell programmatically what is being sort of considered a cluster add-on. I think that will help a lot too. Historically, add-ons have also run in the kube system namespace, which is another sort of hint that it's an add-on as opposed to an application. So I think there are different things we can do in terms of where we place them and how we apply metadata to them consistently, so that it's easy for operators to understand what's an add-on and what's just an application.
Yeah, but there's this fuzzy space that exists too. So it's not a clear demarcation line. There's like this state space of core add-ons, essential things that you need. Then there's these other application things which are kind of like, how are we going to do HPAs and BPAs? What am I going to use Heapster or whatever technology, the matrix server, whatever. There's a demarcation line, and some people want to opt into those things, and some people will want to like not opt into them because they almost consider them application space.
Yeah, I think that's important to consider. Is there, like you and Lucas were saying, there are things that are required for the cluster to actually function, and then there are other things that people might want. Like on GKE, you can say, "Give me ingress," right, or "Give me logging and monitoring," right. And those things we tie their lifecycle to the lifecycle of the cluster, so they're considered add-ons, but they are not strictly required for the cluster to function, right. And so I think that the definition of add-ons is things that you tie to the lifecycle of the cluster, and therefore different installers or different sort of distributions will have a different set of add-ons. And the hope is that the things that are common across those distributions will use the same CRDs and the same operators, so that if you're using kubedns or core DNS, that everybody uses the same core DNS operator, but maybe GKE has more add-ons than something else because it's doing some weird Google specific thing. Right? But from the user's point of view, it'd be clear that those things were add-ons and that they were, in GKE's case, being operated as part of the service offering.
So with regards to the KEP and the graduation criteria, I don't know if you've written anything, but it would be nice to set the graduation criteria to, like, getting the DNS add-on, which is something we have in all places, right? To getting this new flow into the DNS whatever, and then adopting that across all solutions. Which means that is our proof of concept, or just proof that this works. And it doesn't harm anything, because it's like whatever, it's just that same code thing, but still it would be the proof that here is the new add-on thing. So now go ahead and adopt it for yourself. That would be, and then alpha, beta, GA, of course, but like anyway.
I think that's a good call. I think I did put in some graduation criteria that were basically more along those lines, but fuzzier, like saying that, you know, we have operators for most things and that most tooling adopts it. But I like the idea of having like concrete graduation criteria of that nature. I do worry that like COPS holds out and doesn't adopt the add-ons, and so we never graduate it, right? But you know,
Right.
we can address that when we come to it, I guess.
The other thing is like the proxy. Does the proxy need an operator, or doesn't it? Like, are we sure that the Kube Controller Manager, if running a daemon set, is Kube Controller Manager good enough to address all the business logic of the proxy? This is a thing we've pondered on in KubeADM and said, let's hope so. But like, I don't know if it works in practice.
Yeah, actually, so for Kube Proxy specifically, one of the things I thought might happen is like COPS does not use a daemon set for Kube Proxy yet, and in theory we should run different daemon sets based on the node version, which probably means multiple daemon sets. So maybe we really do need an operator there to like manage those multiple daemon sets so they don't become like, you don't have 200 daemon sets in there by the time we're on like Kubernetes 120, right?
Yeah.
So I want to make sure other people get to talk, because Fabrizio unmuted and I saw Merrick unmuted too. So Fabrizio, you want to go? Maybe.
He just disconnected, but
Right. Merrick, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I was just going to say, Justin, that I will look over this tonight and get you some feedback. Susu is interested in it. I just haven't had the time at this point to look over it, so I'll get you some feedback in the future.
Thank you. It's my fault for putting it in late, but I wanted to get it into this. Yeah, I beat the meeting, but didn't give you a lot of time.
Fabrizio, are you back? Right. 1, 2, 3. All right. Is there anything else we want to discuss with regards to the add-on management, other than we should go review it and come back in a couple of weeks and discuss it?
One thing I'll mention is that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Lucas.
Anyone that hasn't said anything that wanted to give some last heads up on what we definitely need to get in there at these points? One, two, three. Okay. Robert, go ahead.
Oh, one thing I was going to, Lubomir suggested on the PR that we have, separate sub-project / working group with a separate meeting for this. So I think the other thing for people to take away is if this is a space that you are particularly interested in, there will probably be sort of a separate place to sort of dive deep and discuss this in depth outside of this meeting. I think this meeting has been really useful for getting people aware of the topic and starting to gather the requirements. But I don't anticipate us using this meeting in the future to continue to discuss requirements and or implementation. That will probably be taken outside of this meeting. So just sort of a heads up for people.
Do you need help with the logistics there, Justin? Or will you just create a meeting?
I will both. I welcome all help with logistics at all times. I am terrible at logistics, but I suspect I will create a meeting. I presume we should do then. I don't know. What's the next step? Is it to do that? We'll reconvene in 2 weeks' time and then schedule a meeting, or do one in between?
So we have problem with the current Zoom setup, because as you maybe saw, we ended 7, or from my time, 7 p.m. sharp with the VG component standard meeting. but that probably, I don't know if there's some like in 2-minute lag or 1-minute lag or whatever that people can't join because we're on the same account for this meeting. So, well, we can create a meeting for you.
That's just how you're using it. There's a way to get around it using the host ID and not log in as the actual user. So
it is. Oh,
yeah.
all
So
right.
you logged in as SIG cluster lifecycle, and that's why.
Yes.
So
right. Okay. Yeah. But we anyway, we can create a meeting in SIG cluster lifecycle Zoom account that you can use the host ID to actually do stuff later. Cool.
Thank you.
Is the horse sufficiently bitten to death here in this one? All right. The next topic I wanted to discuss with the broader SIG is KubeCon EU and developer sessions. Robbie and I chatted about it informally, but I wanted to open it up to the SIG to see what sessions folks thought were appropriate. We have a lot of sub-projects now, and the question is like, how many sessions should we start to apply for, and what has broader interests?
Shall I go first?
How many can you apply for?
Sorry.
I don't think there is a bound. So that's the interesting thing. But I do think we should do some level of logistical grouping, right? Having a per provider implementation of cluster API probably would be too much. Potentially lumping things like Minikube and Kind together, if folks wanted to sort of have this sort of developer-centric view of the world, is another possibility that folks can start to talk about. I definitely think that kubeadm and cluster API as the two central pieces or pillars should still have sessions. But let's open it up for discussion and see what people think.
Yeah, also to answer that question, technically they say, do you want a deep dive for your SIG? Last time we asked for 2 and they gave us 2. So I think this time we can try to ask for more and see what they say. There's also an effort to combine all of the different cloud provider SIGs into a single cloud provider SIG. And one of the things they're deciding as they do that is, if we take these 5 different SIGs and turn it into one, does that mean we only get one session at KubeCon? Maybe we shouldn't combine SIGs. I think that's the wrong incentive. I think for people, I think we should group people are working together regardless of like how many free talks you get at KubeCon. So I think as a large SIG with lots and lots of sub-projects, we should ask for more. And if, as long as we can justify those, I think that's reasonable.
I would love to have a session on COPS, and I'm happy to share that. I feel like I don't know what particularly overlaps with the COPS subspace.
Kube
Perhaps, I feel like the audiences don't necessarily overlap, so I don't know whether we're defining by topic or by audience. Yeah, but I would love to have at least ask for that session, not necessarily a full deep dive, but at least some form of state of the COPS slot.
Right,
Yeah,
right. So do you
deep
think
dive is the one to ask for, though?
Yeah.
Okay. A deep dive is 90 minutes, or how long is a deep dive? I'm sorry.
I think it's still 35 minutes. It's just the audience is supposed to be different, right? So I think what we should do is we should do one intro for the SIG, and the intro can sort of do a sort of spectrum of like, here are the high level topics the SIG is interested in, tell them to put that early in the week, and then have forward pointers to the various deep dives and say, we have a really big SIG with a broad set of interests. We have a number of deep dives that our SIG is sponsoring. Here are the different ones, and here's which ones you should go to based on what you're interested in. And we should ask for sort of as many as we think is reasonable, right? So I think that, Tim and I were sort of chatting, and I came up with like about 4-ish, 4 or 5. And then we can see what they say.
I think that just to have something, I think that's the same you've talked about as well. 1 for kubeadm, 1 for cluster API. Then I like the thing Tim said about like Minikube and Kind being together, and then maybe we'll just make COPS and KubeSpray together as well. If KubeSpray is interested, I don't know if there's someone here from that. And then we have like the cluster API, which is like the specting, talking about that. Then we have kubeadm, which is like, okay, having a building block for Kubernetes. Then we have the developer, more like the user-facing thing with Kind and Minikube. How do I use this locally or whatever? And then Kops and KubeSpray and whatever other project, I don't know if there is. But anyway, those two would have the more, how do I get the production ready thing on like whatever environments running across XYZ working.
Yeah, there is also etcd ADM, but I feel like a brief couple of minutes in the overview would be sufficient, and then the whole way track type thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think similarly for the component config and the add-on stuff. I think mentioning those in the overview, but not proposing a deep dive for those for now makes sense. I would be inclined to ask for Kops and KubeSpray separately, because I do think that the people who would be going to those are sort of vastly different audiences, as Justin was pointing out. Even if sort of in some ways, sort of the target market is similar, right? Like it's like run your stuff in production, but like the people that are running stuff in production using different tools are very different people. And I'm not sure that trying to split 35 minutes across those two audiences, you're going to get enough depth in either one for it to be valuable for either set of audience, right?
I feel like asking for that is the right way to go. And we can see what comes back down the pipe, as it were.
That makes sense to me.
Thomas or Ben, like people who work on Minikube or kubeadm DIND cluster or Kind, like how do you feel about the proposal of sort of grouping those as sort of the sort of developer or sort of like single node sort of cluster lifecycle topic?
I mean, that sounds probably fine to me. I'll note, Liz and I did apply for a separate talk on this in the non-free space. And super tiny knit, we have multi-node now.
Yeah, this would be the developer-focused one, for people that want to contribute and get up to speed, that are part of the developer community.
Yeah, the talk we submitted was more for end users looking to use Kind as part of CI workflows. So I don't think there's much conflict there.
Makes sense.
Is it too early it feels like Cluster API has two audiences. There are users and there are developers. Is it too early to have one for the users?
Until there's an actual cut of V1 Alpha 1, I would say too soon, because we can.
So V1 Alpha 1 might come out before this KubeCon, right? I don't know that it means we should focus on users at this point, but I do think a deep dive becomes interesting due to all the changes between this KubeCon and the last one.
Right. I think
that introduces a challenge of how do you spread that across all of the different providers too, though. Because once you start talking about end users, you're talking about providers.
Yeah, Cluster API by itself you can't really demo it.
Well, so mostly agreed. When I think of a user-focused deep dive, I wouldn't just look at Cluster API. I would consider giving a presentation on Cluster API, kubeadm, Kind. I mean, like all of the different pillars that we have, and show how you can manage an entire life cycle of a cluster using all of the tools together, rather than focusing on one individually. You're right, you would have to pick a provider, but that would just be a small detail in the entire architecture.
I think the end user Voltron moment of the toolbox would be kind of a cool talk to give. I think we're past the point of submitting an end user type of talk, but we could absolutely put something like that into our overall SIG intro.
Yes.
So it's a small detail though, choosing the provider, but it's got potential political, right, like ramifications. If you choose, why do you choose AWS versus Google, or why do you choose Google versus AWS, right?
Clearly, we just have to make a Kind Cluster API provider,
or we choose bare metal.
We choose Raspberry Pis.
Yeah, I mean, I think realistically, if we're going to sort of do demos for like a cluster API deep dive, it's going to sort of recur over multiple KubeCons. And we'll probably talk about this tomorrow, but I'd like to sort of rotate sort of who is giving those deep dives. And I'm hoping that as we do that, we also give different demos, right? We're not always demoing on AWS or always demoing on Google or always demoing on bare metal, but like we rotate through because you can go back and watch the talks from all the KubeCons. So, right, you can go back and watch a demo of it working on Google, and maybe you can go back and watch a demo of it working on AWS. And it's, 6 months old now, but that's okay. Like you still get the idea that it works in multiple places, right? Which I think is a good message to send over time.
Yep.
So I'd love to see that sort of rotate and not say we're going to fight politically. It's just whoever's giving the talk, whatever they feel most comfortable with, this, they should use that.
Yeah.
So isn't one of the...
Sorry, just point that what Liz mentioned, that having a kind provider, that should be interesting because like a dog fooding, and creating a provider for all, something that is also in the same ecosystems. And actually, I'm quite interested on that. Somebody else is interested because I think it's for developers the best option at all.
Well, why wouldn't you put that? Why wouldn't you put that directly in the core as a potential option of Cluster API itself proper? Right, like because right now Cluster API itself is more like a framework, and if it was like the default developer use case for the core, seems much more applicable than trying to create yet another provider, which then would have its own life cycle.
So right now, I would point out that kind and/or Minikube is necessary entering the bootstrap. If that's not going away, then you get a kind of weird chicken and egg thing where the thing that's bootstrapping is also the thing you're bootstrapping to. Not sure if that makes sense.
You can get around this with phases, but yes, you could. That's part of the work that the one-shot mode that we've talked about at length through the phases work.
I also just want to toss out the idea that, so one of the powers of the Cluster API, as I understand it, is that you can use many providers. Could we actually do a demo where we span up across all of them?
Yes. let's
like a normal like CFP talk though.
Yeah, let's wait until we get V1 Alpha 1 and then we've actually set the bar across the providers, and then I'll entertaining the idea. But it's a good forcing function, to be honest. Like let's make the talk now, submit it, and then everybody's got to panic.
Right. But I like we could think about the idea of having, say, like a lightning talk inside. We have 35 minutes in the intro, and I'd be happy to like have some kind of, because we talk about the overall architecture there. We talk about how the components and different sub-projects we have fit together. So why wouldn't we, or why couldn't we put in a 5-minute or 10-minute demo of something that uses them all together in that expected way, and put it on GitHub? Like, I don't know. It could fit into the intro, but the full multi-cloud solution maybe is worthy of a dedicated non-SIG talk, I guess.
Robert, are all of the talks that you request, are they all presentations, or can they be panels or DOFs, etc.?
So the email they send to the SIG chairs says, do you want an intro and do you want a deep dive? Please let us know. And so I believe that those are sort of their own type of talks, which are a little bit different than the ones that you propose on CFPs, where they are sort of quote unquote free talks, right, that they give on sort of the developer track. And I think they're structured such that they're for people who want to contribute. And I think they're limited to 2 presenters also. So they can't really be like a panel type talk.
I would discuss with them though, because I would be surprised if it didn't work. Like if we couldn't have a panel of how to contribute to whatever. But I mean, we were 3 actually in Shanghai presenting the intro for Cycles Lifecycle. So let's ask if you're interested. Well, then then let's see.
In Shanghai, it was officially 2. You added like later on because you already were. So now
Yes, right. But I mean, I was at it, right? So that was when we talked with them. So if we talk with them, maybe. Okay. Any consensus? One talk for Kubernetes, one for Cluster API, one for. I think I didn't hear a strong disagreement, some kind of Minikube being together.
Yeah, so from the Minikube side, I think that we would be fine to do something. One caveat is that both Thomas and I are not going to be able to make it to Barcelona. So maybe Dan Lawrence will help us out. So it's TBD who can represent Minikube.
Yeah, Dan did mention that he'd be willing to talk about it. So. My only concern is as a deep dive, if the time is split up where each get about 15 minutes, there's not much of a difference between a lightning talk and a deep dive at that time point. So we just have to watch our material.
Yeah, I mean 35 minutes was even limiting for a deep dive as well if you want to go really deep.
I guess the other option would be to say, well, just punt on a Minikube deep dive for this time, and we'll sign up for one for KubeCon NA if you guys are planning to go to that one. We don't have to try to do a deep dive for every topic at every KubeCon. If we have people that are going and want to present on it, I think it makes sense to ask. And if people aren't planning to go, then I don't think there's any requirement that we have to cover every project either, right? Like same thing for Kind, right? Like Ben, if you're not going to Barcelona and there's like not a great person to talk about Kind, like we don't have to ask for a deep dive, right?
Well, in our case at least, Dan did express an interest in presenting, so we do have somebody for Barcelona.
And I do believe that it would be super nice to present Kind and Minikube together, because it can be an opportunity to express, like from a SIG perspective, that these two products are together, they have their own use cases, and this is where, like, how you can use them. So I think it's good for the users to clarify.
Yeah, I mean, I think in particular with those two, it's really useful to tell people like when you should use which one, right? Like,
yeah.
I think that'd be a really good message to get across. Is like, we're not going to like show you every detail about Minikube, but we're going to tell you when you should be using it. We're going to tell you, why you should be using it in those cases, and like maybe here's some like tips and tricks that you didn't know, and like kind of the same thing with Kind, right?
Right.
And in that time, you have time to answer questions that are specific to the audience, and you have time to tell people how to contribute in more detail than us doing the intro, which is mostly like, okay, check out this GitHub page. You can say that, well, this is like the flow of how to contribute, like a typical flow to Minikube and one to Kind.
That does all sound kind of hard to cram into 15 minutes, though, for what
Yes.
We're planning to try to just document that more because it's hard to cover all.
Well, if it is hard to cover all this material, is there really an advantage for us trying to do it in the same time slot?
I think it might be worth trying to not cover all of it and just cover some of the things, like maybe why you might want to use one versus the other or something like that.
Exactly. I think that's more beneficial because the primary focus is not the innards. The primary focus for most people is the end user consumption model.
Yep.
We are T-minus like 13 minutes. We kind of spent a lot of time chatting about this, and we were probably going to have to federate out some of this to see who could potentially be presenters for some of this stuff. Is there any other items we want to discuss with regards to KubeCon EU and sessions?
I just want to mention one other thing is I think a lot of people that come to the deep dives want to know like what's the roadmap, where are things headed, and so that's the other really important thing to make sure you slot time in for.
That's a good point.
We do have a roadmap now for Minikube.
Okay. Any last minute updates? The last thing I wanted to do today was just to give a brief status readout, because this is a very large SIG now, and maybe just do a quick round robin. Even if you're not part of the SIG, I know a lot of people are very interested in kind, and people from the SIG are working on kind. So if we can get a brief update there, that would be useful, because it's going to affect some of the other things that we've been planning as P0 for this cycle. So if someone else wants to start it off, like Robbie, do you want to start off maybe a cluster API update?
Sure. I was just trying to look at what I said 2 weeks ago last time we did this. So last time I mentioned we did issue triage. So we've been keeping up with our issue triage, and we are now trying to burn down the set of issues tagged for the V1 Alpha 1 milestone. It is slowly sort of creeping down. We're trying to assign outstanding issues and get things resolved. Vince and I started working on a doc sort of proposing some somewhat radical restructuring of the API. I accidentally shared it with the entire SIG's mailing list when I shared it with Vince. So you probably saw a link for that go by. But if you're interested in sort of where we think that the API might go in the future and sort of doing some refactoring, please go ahead and check that out. We're going to be discussing it in more detail during the API breakout meetings. I think we're also seeing sort of good momentum on multiple different providers, keeping up with the main repo and sort of providing a baseline for us to sort of validate that the things we're building actually work. So it's been great to see.
I'll do a brief update for Kubenium. Pretty much 1.14 is kind of a semi-quiescent release. We did a hard push to get to GA. There are some major feature enhancements that we are addressing, one of which is the HA secret story that we've had ongoing in perpetuity for several cycles. That KEP's been approved. We are going to try and execute on that. So get HA out of experimental and kind of make the user story even cleaner. So like we have a user story for HA, we consider it experimental. It's not as clean as we would hope. We are churning on it, and hopefully it'll be cleaner again and again and again as we iterate on it. The next one is like we did Kubenium init phases, where we put a lot of the subcommands that we had in alpha phases into init for how the entire workflow worked. Kubenium join phases is being worked on this cycle. There's a number of other bug fixes. Anything that's kind of major feature adds, especially that would be API affecting, have been punted. We do not plan to address those things in this cycle. Otherwise, the V1.14 milestone has been very curated and is remarkably stable for this time in the cycle. Usually it expands wildly and then then I have to boot a bunch of stuff out. But it's remarkably stable. So if folks want to engage, the standard process applies. Just because someone's assigned doesn't mean that you can't jump in and help out. Just say, I'd like to work on this. And unless it's marked as lifecycle active, you can go ahead and start taking some issues.
Cool. I can do a quick one for the component standard work group. We've got the component-based repo merged, which is a good first step. We have a K-flag proposal up for Mike Dolphin is finalizing that at the moment and making it cleaner so we can publish to GitHub soon. A KEP for basically an enhanced P flag for use with Kubernetes, or like anything that has these specific requirements, basically. Merging flags on top of a config in a structured manner. I'm gonna open enhancement issues for component base and all component configs, but it's unclear whether any components configs are gonna be graduated this cycle either, because, well, whatever. Like that requires component owners to actually go through their APIs and see that things look okay with regards to that structure. But the restructuring to component base is proceeding. Open questions still around various stuff, but at least it's ongoing. So feel free to jump in there if you have time, and we're meeting directly before this meeting, which, well, better for us.
I can give a quick COPS update if think the most interesting thing I think that's happening in COPS with broader relevance is we are finally making our move to etcd3 and making that mandatory. Yay! But as part of that, we're actually making etcd secure by default. And I think we'll make it impossible to opt out of. And we're also stopping. We're trying to stop external add-ons from using the same etcd. So Calico and Cilium, we are going to move to their CRD modes and effectively ban any access to etcd other than through the API server.
Just so you know that has some pretty drastic effects at scale. Because endpoints is the highest churned object in the entire system. And at scale, if you have endpoints using a common etcd, you get weird behavioral effects.
You mean like the Calico move to CRDs?
Any CNI that uses CRDs to basically do endpoint creation for pods, which includes for every CNI, right? So if you use the common, it works for small scale to medium scale, but once you get to large scale, it's not just bad, it's catastrophic.
I mean, I think there are different architectures, but yes, we do expect that the CNI providers may have to up their game if they are doing per pod work in that. But Flannel, for example, shouldn't have this issue because it does like a per node CIDR.
And also kubeNM has done this for a long time. So we're already forcing them to do something else. And yes, the really large scale issue is probably there for some other providers, but not all of them have it.
And Calico has done their, what do they call it, TIFA, I think, to address some of this, but I'm sure that we will find more such issues. Thank you for calling that out. But I thought that was the most, that's sort of, I think, the most interesting thing for this SIG. And yeah, hopefully we'll get onto like cluster API and things like that soon, but this is this week's update.
Minikube, kind.
I can go for kind. So we had our first sub-project meeting yesterday. It is now Mondays at 11 o'clock a.m. Pacific. We had a couple of hiccups with that, but hopefully we'll get that scheduled better going forward. And we are just working towards more spoolie fixes and started to discuss some other changes that we want to make going forward.
Can I ask a quick question on that? Do you support multi-master in kind?
We do.
Sweet. Thank you. Is that documented?
I'm not sure how well it's documented, but I believe it's at least somewhat documented. If you want to follow up, I can point you to that.
Thank you.
All right. I'll go for Minikube. So we picked up a couple of new maintainers and documented our issue triage process based on the Kubernetes community processes. We pushed out a new bug fix release, and we'll follow up with another one next week. But more importantly, we defined which issues we will resolve for 1.0. 1.0 is focused around documentation and debuggability. And we also released our 2019 roadmap, and our priorities post 1.0 are localization and the ease of installation. I'll put a link in into the meeting notes for the roadmap.
Cool. That's it for the roundtable, or do we have any more?
At CDDM, we are trying to get our repo and everything all going. Sorry.
Thanks. One thing I started thinking about now, I got a ping about we need to get the setup tab of the docs sites fixed, because it's a mess.
Yes.
And yeah, we need an owner, right? And we need someone to shepherd that and quickly.
We have a general docs problem across the whole SIG right now. We did
yes,
have.
but like I think that would be P0 in terms of like, or it should be P0 in terms of SIG documentation.
So I'm missing the context on this. What is the setup problem?
So on the setup docs tab, there's a lot of really old getting started guides, like things that existed in Kubernetes 0 dot something. They are still there, and also the getting started from scratch thing, which has been updated in like years.
Yeah.
Etc. And we're actually kind of like, we have some coverage on our sub projects, but not as well as we would like to. So for a new user getting into this page, they have actually no idea, and then they have no, kubeadm is and Minikube is like visible enough, but like for the rest of the things, it's like,
If we deleted anything that wasn't conformant, would that help? Like, how is that a good first step?
Yes, that's the kind of the first step we're gonna take, but somebody's gotta do it, right? We need to find a person.
Can I ask a really quick question? Who could I get in touch to help out with this? I'll be interested in doing this kind of work.
Lucas, myself, and Lubomir.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. That would be great.
We are at time, so we should probably end now. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.